Hey guys, so we're just going to be playing around with Lazy Nezumi in this one, checking out some of the things it can do. Now this program is for your graphics tablet, right? So it's going to work in a multitude of different programs where it'll add the ability to add brush smoothing or play around with the pressure curves and things like that. And also use some things like rulers, right? It's a really great little program. Now I truthfully don't utilize every little aspect of it, but it has some interesting features for sure. And it might be something you want to check out. So first up, you have to attach it to the window that you're in. So you file attach to window. You can see it's already attached, but you click and drag the little icon. It'll attach to Krita here in this case, or you can do Blender. In the case of Blender, you can exit that once you're done. You'll have to toggle this on and off quite a bit because the UI gets a little squirrely when it's on in Blender, but it's excellent for like sculpting, for example. So you can still use it for sculpting, but you'll want to turn it on and off, right? So the on-off button. All right, now it has a number of different presets in here, and usually I'm using subtle or massive smoothing. That's the main things there. But there's all kinds of other stuff in here you want to toy around with. You certainly can. There's like, you want to make a tree, just click and hold. It'll start making a tree for you, perhaps, right? It's kind of interesting. You can script your own little setups like that out, but there's a number in here as little examples at least. And so if you find a use for that, that's awesome. I don't know what I would do with it, but there you go. There's some rulers that are preset as well. These are all presets. So we're just going to go down to smoothing subtle. You can see what it looks like. It's pressure processing and pressure smoothing, or position smoothing. Right. So, and it's set up like this. So it just adds a little tiny amount of smoothing to your brush strokes. That's all it's doing. So it's killing off like the cattails. If you've ever, let's see if I can even do one with my tablet's not too bad for them, but yeah, a lot of times when you're trying to do a brush stroke out, it just does like this little, like you might have like a cattail like that, right? So a lot of times tablets do that. This will help prevent that with the pressure processing. And then, but the position smoothing obviously will get rid of like jitter in your brush strokes if you ever run into that issue, or you have a shaky hand perhaps, right? So you can tweak the amount of smoothing here. And right now it's using moving average. So the more you turn it up, the more delay you get to your brush stroke, but the smoother it becomes, basically. Basic idea. So if I go to smoothing massive, this is virtually the same setup. It's only, it has a cursor that'll pop up, basically. You can see. Right? And it's a little bit more delayed than subtle. So that's really the only changes there, I think. Maybe the pressure processing is a little bit different. Who knows? Now, normally it's like a green color. I've already made it yellow so that way you guys can just see it better because the green can be sometimes hard to see. And so there's that. But we can tweak the values here if we wanted to, make it stronger or weaker or whatever the case, and so on and so forth. We can change the type of smoothing it does as well. So we can use a pulled string, for example, instead of moving average. And you can tweak the value here to whatever you want. If you've never seen pull string before in any programs, it's something like this. You click, drag, and if you want to do like a nice curve, you could. But if you stop, you see, you can change directions basically and do sharp corners still and round corners very predictably. So you can do that even in Blender. That's the craziest thing, right? And so pulled string is kind of interesting. It's one you might want to utilize. Exponential moving average, very similar to this one, but it's going to feel very delayed at first. Just turn down the strength of it, and you'll see it's very, very similar to what we were just using. So just keep that in mind. As far as inertia goes, I don't really care for this one, but it's based off of how fast you do things, basically. It's going to carry like the curve around, you see, like a little delay to it. And it's hard to see it, but you'll feel it when you're using it. I don't personally use it, but moving average is all I need. And tweaking the values usually I do quite a bit of. So with that out of the way, a lot of the other ones I don't even tweak or modify because it's not really necessarily a thing that I need anyway. So like pressure curve, you could turn it on, start to change some of the settings in here, or you can like auto adjust as well. So if you want to try auto adjusting it, there you go. You want to use that, use it. There's pressure processing here. If you want to turn it up or down, that's just going to be like how fast it fades in and out and how smooth it becomes. Like if you, let's crank it really high. You see it comes in really slow and then, yeah. So it could give you nicer results perhaps if you want to toy around with that one too. And pressure speed scaling. Once again, more stuff you can tweak and fiddle with. I don't know that one at all, so I'm not going to bother explaining it. The tilt rotation one is kind of interesting. The tilt rotation here, for example, we'll see that it's on 0 by default. So when I'm doing strokes like this, a lot of times, and I have tilt on this brush, you see sometimes it kind of rocks back and forth at like a 90-degree angle. It's a little bit too much for me, too fast anyways. You know, you can crank this thing up, and all it's going to do is smooth the, like it's almost like, depending on how fast you're going, how fast it starts to tilt, it's just going to slow that down, basically. That's all it's doing. So you can make it more responsive or less responsive. Really quite simple on that one. And also useful. I'll use that one. Other than that, we're talking about rulers, right? And so rulers, you can set up here on this one, but there's presets for it, obviously, if you want to use those. But like there's like an ellipse ruler. I'm going to reset it. Try to get it back to its default settings. Strangely enough, it doesn't reset per se to its default settings. Like you have to, it kind of stays doing whatever you've changed it to. So it's a little interesting in that respect. Not like a big reset button for it. But you can see an ellipse tool, right? So you hold Control. Oh, well, let me explain this. Alt, Shift, or Alt, Control, and Shift, or Shift, Control, Alt. However you want to look at it, I guess. The all those keys can modify what this does. So if I hold Control, we get like a little user interface thing going. We can change like tick distance, but usually these control something here. Okay. So you'll see as I change tick distance, it's right there as well. So we could just grab here instead if we want to change tick distance, right? Play around with that value, get what we want going on. Like rotation, for example. You see rotations down there. So we can rotate things and do that number. We want to just reset it. Boom. All right. We want to move things around. I don't believe there's any move location stuff. So there you have. You can move like so, though. You got to be careful when you're in Krita because Control is your color sample. Sometimes you'll go back to a gray. You don't realize it, or white, or whatever the case. Whatever your background color is. And yeah, there we go. So we can do things like this all day long. And this one will let you squish. I think, oh, not that one. Degree, I guess, right? We'll let you squish, then you can rotate. I'm kind of backwards here, it feels like. Right. So you get the idea, like we can control an ellipse, basically. It gets a little bit better, though. It's a little bit more to this one. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring it all back out. Let's reset it, kind of. All right. And I'm going to turn on radial lines. Okay. This is confusing because sometimes it's really hard to see your brush, right? Like it's in the bottom right now. I wish it would only do one edge at a time, but I guess if you wanted symmetry, it's good to have all four. I wish it was an option, to be honest. Whatever the case, but we can do our regular circle now, or ellipse. We can hit Shift or tap Shift, and we'll actually switch to the lines going in and out now. So we can actually do numbers like this too. You can see we can create some pretty wild art with just this tool alone. It would be an excellent way of just coming up with ideas for more radial type stuff, right? Now that's the ellipse tool in a nutshell. It's pretty simple and straightforward. You want to switch back, you just tap Shift again. You can keep going, right? All right, let's move on to, we'll do parallel lines. So parallel lines, this one's interesting. Wherever your cursor is, wherever your brush is, you can see it's kind of hard to see it. You hold Control, and you can rotate off that point and make a perfectly straight line. Now you can just go through here and make parallel lines one with the other, if you wanted parallel lines in this manner anyways, right? It's really useful. And turn the ruler off for a second, because when you're using brushes in Krita, at least, you can hold V and do straight lines, but sometimes it's hard to get them perfectly parallel. So the parallel ruler, obviously, is definitely going to be worthwhile. And moving on, we have connected lines. This one's just really kind of strange in my opinion. I don't know how I would use it exactly, but like you do like a line, one stroke, and then you can hit Shift and you can tab through the different points, start, middle, end. So then you can go from somewhere else and go through there. And now you can go through this one and do that same thing. So it's really cool in a way. I'm just not sure how I would exactly use it, but it's kind of fun, right? To be able to work that way. But I'm gonna leave that up to you if you find that one useful or not. Isometric is super useful. If you were to unlink this for just a second, type in 30 and negative 30. If you looked at my Gumroad, you know I had the isometric tools on there, and it's always a 30 and negative 30. And the camera in Blender, when you set it at a quarter angle, this is the angle you want to do isometric drawings usually, so you can line the cameras up super easy. So you can actually model off of these things if you wanted to as well. So isometric, of course, is not like 2-point perspective or 1-point perspective. It's no perspective. Everything's parallel. But you've seen these before. People do this kind of artwork all the time where they do little interior environments and sketch them out and paint them and all that fun stuff. There is no perspective in them, usually. It's just something like this anyways. You can put like a door, refrigerator, something in here, and some shelving on the wall, things like that. Super fast way of working, tons of fun. As you play around with that one, especially if you're more accurate with it, you'll definitely get the hang of it. It's just fun to work with anyways. And you don't, just toggling the ruler on, setting it real quick, and you're good to go. So moving on from that one, we are looking at the fisheye lens effect, of course. I'm going to try not to go too deep into this one. I'm going to move it just for a second. Yeah, fisheye lens effect when you're sketching out things can definitely be interesting. So maybe you're doing like an interior scene. You're doing like a hallway. You see where that's starting to go. So like we can maybe knock a door in here. Maybe it's like a hotel or whatever. So it just gives you a really interesting perspective, basically, to create whatever kind of drawings you want to create, more or less. And there's lots of stuff in here to change. I'm not even going to go through it because I don't actually utilize this one really. But there's linear perspective as well. And a lot of times these things come in, they're all kind of goofed up. You really have to understand these values here and like which one's changing what, like the horizon tilt and all that fun stuff. And you can see like it's not like you can just control Z and undo these things sometimes. So you really have to just toy around with it. You might have to go back and adjust some numbers. I don't think there is like a default reset button for these. If there is, it would have to, more than likely, you would have to set a preset first and then discard whatever you're doing. And it would, when you load that preset again, it would be more set up correctly. So you can see mine's a mess right now, first of all. But there are some interesting things in here, like you can set up, you can just hold control and tap the grid here, for example. But you can see we do get perspective lines. These perspective lines go out to who knows where. And if we can't get to them, it's really hard to adjust them, right? Now in Krita here, you'll have to use spacebar to move so that when you turn this option on, it will, when you pan with the spacebar, it'll move with it. So you can actually get to the other points if needed, which is really nice. I'll turn that off real quick. But it's, yeah, it's still a little bit finicky. It's a little bit weird to work with. And once you start tweaking it by accident, you'll have to reline things up manually and just get it going again. You can see it's all over the place. So it's usually not this bad. I just want to mention that. I've definitely geeked it up. Resetting the center is not going to reset all of it, obviously. So yeah, you can set up actual linear perspective and it works. It's actually not too bad. Krita actually has better perspective tool. I'm going to talk about it here in a second. We're going to go over vanishing lines real quick. So it's kind of the same idea. You can see we have 3 vanishing lines and we have this little setup here in the middle, right? So we can move it around or do whatever we got to do here, right? Okay, let's reset it real quick because it's actually off somewhere over here. Right. Perspective lines like so. Why it's stuck way over here, I don't know. So this is our cursor that we're drawing with. The other ones are the layout. So it's a 3-point right now. Vantage point 1, 2, and 3. So 3-point perspective. You can tap on these, hit Control, tap on them. You can adjust these as well. Okay. If you hit Shift, you can adjust the other ones. So all 3 of them basically, right? It's a little bit interesting. Hold Control, tap back out of it. And now you can see, you can get all this going exactly the way we need it, basically, for a 3-point perspective, more or less. And it could also be very useful. Now, I'm suspecting that vanishing point 4, 5, and 6, right? I'm going to take a wild guess that this is going to be useful, especially if you want to also maybe set up things like shadows, perhaps. Or maybe you just need 6 vanishing points for all kinds of different objects and stuff. That's up to you if you're going to do all that. I don't use that, but I don't use either of these perspective ones, even though I really like them when they work. It's just that Krita's works better in my opinion because it saves with your KRA file. When you save your Krita file, you don't need those ones. You also have a perspective ellipse tool, and let's go through that real quick. We'll reset it real quick. So perspective ellipse is actually really useful, even if you're using Krita's perspective tool. So because you can grab handles and can line things up in perspective, right? And then this is where it gets fun because now we have that. We can hold control, drag the middle. You'll see it stays in perspective, right? So you can always do a perfect ellipse when needed. That's the main idea. Matter of fact, you'll see that we have, like, we can move the corners, we can slide the edges, we can do all that fun stuff if we need it, right? But if we hold control, those change, and you can see we can slide quads, or we can do a VP3 setup. So we do the vanishing point setup, and now look what we can do. We can tweak this as well in a direction we might want this cylinder to go, or if you want to turn it into a cylinder anyways. So we hold control, we can get out of the edit mode, right? So not only can we move it forward and backwards like this, but if we hold control and grab one of these, we can move it forward or backwards that way, right? See how that works? We can also do that number or that number. All right. So really cool little tool in my opinion. So if you want to make a perfect cylinder every time, right? You just turn that ruler off. Use your line tool. And there you go. Potentially have a perfect cylinder every time. Right. Now, let's talk about Krita's real quick and why it's so good. Let's delete all that actually. Okay. So Krita's perspective, or drawing tools at least, or drawing guides. Drawing assistant tools, what's called. Assistant tool. It's usually in the settings docker, but I have the settings docker in my toolbar up here. You can configure Krita to do this, so, but you got to restart Krita after you change the settings. It has a 2-point perspective. It has ellipses. It has all kinds of other fun stuff. Very similar to what Lazy Nezumi Pro is doing, but these save with your Krita file. So every time you load your Krita file, they come back exactly where they were. That's the main benefit. Lazy Nezumi doesn't do that, right? 2-point, for example, you click and hold shift and click and drag, and you can do this number. Okay. And so you can set up a perspective grid that quick, 2-point perspective anyways. You'll notice that there's not really, like, we might be able to do other perspectives as well. I just find the 2-point to be the most useful. So, but ellipses could also maybe be useful to you. I actually like Lazy Nezumi's ellipses more, and the spline tools with Lazy Nezumi I like more as well. But we'll get into all this. We're not going to go over all these, but just a 2-point real quick. You can see when we have it selected, this little handle, we go up here, and you'll see that we can change like the opacity of this, change the color of it, the density of it, even if we wanted to, right? We can do all that fun stuff. And so now that we have that set, we go to our brush tool, and our brush tool is going to look like this. It looks very similar, right, to some of that stuff Nezumi was doing. What we can do is we can, you'll see that under your brush setting, right, you can snap to assistance. You can come up here and toggle this on if you wanted to. There's some options in here as well to play around with, but snap to assistance. Settings, configure Krita, keyboard shortcuts, look for snap. You'll find snap to assistance. I change it to S. So whenever I want to use this, I don't go up there anymore. I just press S, and I can now snap to my drawing assistant, you see? So this is a really quick, fun way of coming up with scenes very fast and kind of blocking them in, if you would, right? And so you can definitely do this. You can do potentially vehicles and stuff like this too, right? Because it's a perspective grid and it's just useful all around. Sometimes it's hard to get started on the right edge, but it works for the most part. So a really fun way of working. And then you combo it up. And that's really, I think, the secret about Lazy Nezumi is like, you're probably not going to use all of it, but it's nice to have just additional little tools that you can rely on, you know, like you can, like maybe you can rely on Krita's built-in stuff, or maybe you can rely off of Lazy Nezumi a little bit, depending on what you're trying to do or achieve or whatever, right? You have that balance now that if something doesn't work quite right in Krita and maybe it works better in Nezumi, now you have that option, you know? So something in Blender, like the brush smoothing in Blender drives me mad. I got brush smoothing now on all of my sculpting tools or grease pencil or whatever. I don't have to turn it on in Blender whatsoever. And I can just use Nezumi instead. So it's like a speed thing sometimes, and could be maybe useful to you. Right, but yeah, we could just keep drawing all day and just come up with the craziest scenes really fast. The only problem with the drawing assistant here is that I feel like sometimes it gets snapped onto the wrong edge a little bit too fast, too soon or whatever. But other than that, I mean, it works fine. You see, like I'm trying to go down to the bottom right and it feels like it's drawn to the left for some reason. It's or down maybe. It's a little bit weird sometimes, but great for blocking in ideas. Okay. And then that's where you would realize, like, you know, we're using this. We can press S, turn the snapping off. Great. Nothing wrong with that. Let's go draw an assistance real quick. Delete that. You can actually hide them. You can move them. And you can lock them even. But you can also delete them as well. So, and then sometimes those little handles get in the way of each other if you have a bunch of guides going on. So you can just move them around with that little like menu looking button thing. So, but here's the thing. There's certain things in Nezumi that are just easier to set up in my opinion. Like, so for example, I want to use the mega crosshair up here, right? The mega crosshair. I like this thing actually. I think it's really useful because I always lose my brush a lot. And I don't like a lot of the way the cursors are displayed. Like I like having the preview of the cursor, but I really like being able to find where I'm working at. And this is like a huge quality of life improvement in my opinion, to be able to just set this on, right? Now, that's not to say you can't use something like that in Krita. You can set up a guide that does something similar. So like you do drawing assistant, and we're going to use the, not infinite ruler. We're going to use parallel ruler. Okay. We're going to click, hold shift and click, hold shift and click, right? So we can do things like this. Now, when I go back to my regular brush, you'll see we have more or less the mega crosshair now, kind of the same idea going on. But see, it's a little bit weird and counterintuitive to find that kind of a feature by using drawing assistance and setting up two lines in order to get that going, right? So it's just little things like that. In reality, I believe Lazy Nezumi was really made to be used with Photoshop originally. It's just that back in the day, Photoshop didn't have brush smoothing. It never had really great guides and ability to draw and sketch without setting up a perspective grid yourself. Like you would have to like sketch one out with the line tools or something, and then use that as just an overlay image to work off of, right? But when you have these kinds of tools that you can just set up dynamically in a drawing file, and it's way better. So this, of course, works across multiple programs, but yeah, I think its whole intent originally was mostly for Photoshop, but it's been updated since. It gets updates quite regularly. If you were to buy or purchase it, it's really not a bad program at all. And yeah, so as far as other rulers go, really the only ones left are the Bezier ones. So we got quadratic Bezier, quadratic. All right, anyways, I say that right. You can hold control, move it around, just grab the handles otherwise. And so if you ever need like perfect little curves, you can see my other handles way back under there for some reason. If you ever need like perfect little curves, you can do that. There's some options for these things as well. And it's nice to turn that space bar option on as well. So you see. But you can, you see like right now, they're kind of going out exponentially or whatever. You can make them parallel too. And that should stop that from occurring, right? So we'll get this result. Whereas if it was off, I believe it will change too much shape. and they'll converge back together basically. Right? So you can keep them parallel and you can straighten them out as well. So let me delete everything real quick. So instead of it curving back out, it just goes straight after, right? When you have that option on. You can see my stroke is way off from the line, so it's acting goofy. But there you go. Right, so that's the difference between those two. I like straightening the edges out, and I like it parallel. I think it works good. So moving on. Oh, sometimes there's these little options where you can like fit it to the perspective ruler if you have it set up. So just keep that in mind. You can try those as well if you set up a perspective. And so here's another one, of course, where we're looking at the handles here are basically, you can rotate them and you can scale them as well, like move them in and out. So it's a little hard to see that effect there, I think. But like you rotate it and you want it to scale out. We can do like some crazy curves like that. Could be really useful to you perhaps. If you just want to try to, sketch out ideas and designs real fast and you want a little bit more accuracy, these kinds of tools will save your life, right? I personally really like the simple one. I think it works out really well. So whenever you're trying to create corners on something, you got to have them parallel. Obviously, that's going to be way better. And then you want to switch to whatever else you might want to use, like the ellipse. Turn off the radial lines. I don't really use that too much. But like I can draw a perfect circle somewhere inside of here. Right? And maybe I want to lock it. So I always know that size. So I can move it again later. Position it where I need it. Turn it off. Hold V and do it back down. Right, you see the pressure curve. It does influence some of this stuff a little bit too much sometimes. You got to be very careful with how you do curves sometimes. Krita is pressure sensitive as you hold V and do a line. So like if we do heavy, light, heavy, you see, you can do stuff like that if you didn't know that. Now, yeah, that's pretty much Lazy Nezumi in a nutshell, guys. I mean, it's really simple and straightforward. I use it mostly for just simple brush smoothing and some of those guides, the ellipse guide, the Bezier one, two of my favorites for sure. And an isometric as well, I think can go a long way. But for the most part, you can see if I toggle it on and off like that, that's what you're going to want to do for Blender. I'm using the shortcuts that I've set up. Massive, subtle, toggle on, toggle off by hitting the key twice, basically. So I'm hitting F1 twice right now. And that's it. Just, turn it on if you need it. If you want to stay sketchy, just turn it off and just do some sketching. Turn it on if you want things a little bit smoother. Turn it to massive if you want them even more smooth. Maybe it's not smooth enough yet, so you can just crank the value up. You can do like very purposeful line arts if you wanted to, right? So yeah, not everybody's hardware is going to, of course, be as accurate as possible. It depends on what kind of tablet you're using and whatnot. And if you ever run into accuracy issues, whether it's jittering and it's just looking kind of bad overall, you're not getting the results that you want out of your drawing abilities, use something like Lazy Nezumi or any of the built-in brush smoothing even. Don't be afraid of using tools to get the job done. We are not doing necessarily traditional art here. It's not necessarily about being the best fine artist. You're doing digital art. And even fine artists, they'll use rulers. And, when guys are doing designs for vehicles and stuff like that, they're measuring things too and using compasses and stuff like that. If they're just sketching them out, perhaps, right? Not always the case, but a lot of times they are at some point going to start doing that kind of stuff when designing and doing extremely detailed art pieces anyways. You're going to start thinking about stuff like that. So, but the trick, I think, is that when you think of traditional, you're using a pencil and paper. Most people don't really think about it, but like your pencil, like you have the paper and your pencil is dug into the surface of it, right? That it sinks into the surface and like the surface bends down, and that's how you get those little drawing marks in your paper, right? If you use the eraser, you'll still see your drawing sometimes. To me, that amount of texture there, or that amount of like how much that lead sinks into the surface of the paper, you don't get that on a tablet really. Like the tablets have texture, sure. It has a little bit of grit to it, but it's not the same as drawing on paper, right? And so it's almost like that amount of friction, that just little bit of force is almost going to force you to have smoother lines because you have to drag against it, right? Like you're dragging all the way through it. And to me, that's what this moving average really is. That's what it reminds me of anyways, right? That's just what it feels like. So if you don't see the cursors and you sketch with it and it's fairly responsive, like you don't have it too high, it does feel very natural, okay? So I just wanted to explain why some people say that Lazy Nezumi feels more natural. That's what's probably occurring there, what's going on. On top of that, though, there are, should I say, paintings that are made with pull strings, right? And so, not that you're going to replicate that process in digital, but you know, pull strings are a real thing in fine art, even, and so you want to keep that in mind. But when you're using something like a liner brush as well, when you're doing acrylic painting or oil painting or whatever, a liner brush, if you don't know what they look like, they look something like, let me try to start that over. I got hung up or something. Okay, so a liner brush looks something like this. All right, it's like a, you know, you got your typical paintbrush kind of head, right? But it's just hairs that are really thin, like this. Okay. And so when you use this thing on paper, it usually does a number like this, right? Like it's very thin. And to me, that's that directional movement, like it's moving in this direction, right? It's just dragging behind it. To me, that's lazy mouse in a nutshell. Like if you've ever used a program that they had lazy mouse, it's very similar to moving average or pulled string, but it's basically this right here, right? Like that's what that feels like, right? So if you're going to do calligraphy, you know, are you going to necessarily do everything with like a number, like a ballpoint pen, like, or a pencil? Like you could, but a lot of people like to use those really long brush tips like that. So it allows you to kind of, like if you push it down further, it'll eventually create a thicker line weight, but at the very tip here, it'll be a very small line weight, right? So it'll be just like a little, talking about like the difference being like this, right? You can start to make it thicker. Anyways, so traditional techniques, you know, you're not, like they're not replicated in a drawing or a graphics tablet, right? Not usually anyways. Not much anyways, except for like maybe like super sharp drawing with like a super sharp pencil. Even the tilt doesn't feel right. So a lot of times it just feels a little bit off. That's what that delay replicates though, right? That's really what it comes down to, in my opinion. And this is why, if a lot of people really like this program still to this day, like even though you might have drawing assistants, you might have brush smoothing already in other programs, and some of that brush smoothing feels very similar to this. Whatever their algorithm is, it does feel very natural. And so just keep that in mind. And like, you know, you have pressure control as well now, so you can tweak that. And top it all off, don't forget to modify your fall off on your pen in your driver settings for your graphics tablet as well. So if you want a smoother curve going up like that, you know, instead of having a linear amount of strength, because that's what I do personally. I set it to something more like this on my pen in general. So every program is going to behave that way. It just feels way more natural and more sensitive, in my opinion, doing that. But so anyways, yeah, that's Lazy Nezumi in a nutshell, guys. I hope you enjoyed. I'll check you out in the next one. All right, take care.